On the wedding day, all the guests looked at me, the lonely bride, with sympathy. When I called, Cyrus said that he was in the hospital because Amira was injured and he couldn't leave now. Amira was his first love. So what was I to him then? I hung up the phone, extinguishing the last glimmer of hope. Before my vision blurred, the scarlet bloodstains marred the pure white wedding dress. Cyrus probably wouldn't have thought that for the rest of his life, he would be deeply regretting the decision he made on this day. Cyrus came back. This was the first time he had returned to this so-called home since we got our marriage certificate. Unfortunately, he wasn't alone. Amira was with him. I watched as Amira helped him to the sofa, fetched a hot towel and warm water, and moved in and out of this house with familiarity, as if she were the true mistress here. I stood at the doorway, watching them like an outsider looking on. Cyrus furrowed his brow slightly and slowly opened his eyes. His nose was straight and his brow bones were deep, looking as handsome as the boy I remembered. When he saw me, his brows furrowed even deeper. "Why did you bring me here?" I heard Cyrus ask Amira in a low voice. Amira wiped the sweat from his forehead with a towel and then reached out to massage his temples, coaxing him gently, "It's closer here. You're not feeling well. Have a sleep first." They were so close to each other, and the atmosphere was filled with an ambiguous entanglement. I lowered my eyes, unable to bear looking any longer. Amira handed me the keys and said without looking at me, "Ayen has drunk a lot. Don't wake him up later." Her tone was so natural, as if I were just a maid here. After Amira left, I looked at Cyrus. Maybe it was because of the alcohol, he no longer had the energy to pretend. In his eyes when he looked at me, there was only coldness and disgust. He beckoned to me as if I were some kind of pet he had kept. "Luna, come here." I walked slowly towards him. He pulled me forcefully, and I fell into his lap. The hot breath blew on the side of my neck, and I couldn't help but move away, but then I heard a murmur, "Luna." I was stunned. Cyrus hadn't called me like that for a very long time. That was my nickname. When I first met him as a child, he also smiled and called me Luna. Without warning, hot tears welled up in my eyes and fell on the back of his hand. Cyrus's movement paused for a moment, and then there was an even stronger storm. In those black eyes, there was an anger and pain that I couldn't understand. "Why are you crying?" There was a sneer in my ear. "Luna, isn't this what you wanted? Now what are you pretending to be so noble for?" Cyrus had never been this close to me, nor had he ever been this far away. I closed my eyes, and the tears streamed down from the corners of my eyes, disappearing into the darkness. Cyrus and I grew up together. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that he had a little sister who was like a persistent shadow that he couldn't shake off. I was 3 years younger than him. I followed him around all day long, pestering him and calling him brother. Although Cyrus was used to keeping a cold face and ignoring me, in my heart at that time, he was the best person in the world. Second only to Cyrus's father. I was taken home by Cyrus's father. My memories of my original family were actually very vague. I only remembered my father who was always drunk. Alcohol was the thing I feared the most as a child. Once my father touched alcohol, he would hit me. No matter how much I cried and begged, I always ended up with a body full of scars. He grabbed my shoulders and said I was a jinx, that I had killed my mother, and he even said, "Why wasn't it me who died?" Later, many people came to my house, saying that my father owed them money and they took away all the things in the house. I crouched in front of the empty house, hoping that my father would come back soon. He came back. He dragged me to kneel in front of a beautiful small villa. That was the first time I saw Cyrus's father. I saw my father rush forward and hug his legs. "President Cyrus, I really have no money. I have only this one daughter. She's good looking, like her mother. Look." My father's mouth was opening and closing, but I couldn't understand a single word he was saying. I couldn't help but shrink back. Just a moment ago, my father had ordered me to cry out loud and look pitiful. When I said I couldn't cry, my father slapped me twice. "Isn't this crying?" my father said. I didn't dare to look up. The tears were streaming down due to the stimulation of the scorching sun. Cyrus's father walked towards me, stepped aside to block the sun for me, and a pair of warm hands gently stroked my swollen cheek. I heard him sigh. "Let's go. Your brother is waiting for you at home." My hand was held by Cyrus's father. I finally looked back at my father kneeling on the ground. Remembering my mother who always called me a bad omen, suddenly a vague sense of relief welled up in me. That day, the sun was especially bright. "Luna, this is your brother. From now on, this is your home." I followed the direction pointed by Cyrus's father's finger and saw that boy. He was just standing there, with a beautiful cold face, but he easily made my heart flutter. Cyrus didn't like me, this little shadow, at that time. He warned me coldly all day long not to follow him. But children don't care about such things. At that time, I just thought that Brother Yen was the most handsome person I had ever seen. His facial features were delicate yet heroic. Although he was still a boy, it could be seen that he would grow up to be extremely handsome in the future. With Cyrus's father's "Cyrus, take good care of your sister" as a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card, I became even more fearless. I pestered him all day long, clumsily showing my affection in a childish way. Although Cyrus had a cold face, I knew he was kinder than anyone. Cyrus would coax me when I couldn't sleep on rainy days, and would silently take the blame for me when I got into trouble. Because of him and Cyrus's father, I first understood the meaning of home. Cyrus's father was busy with work. On countless evenings after school, I counted the tiles at the school gate over and over again. By the 10th time, Cyrus would always show up in front of me with a scowl on his face. I called him brother, with a big smile on my face, but Cyrus would only reply with a cold I still remember that day when a classmate called me an orphan, a child no one wanted. I quarreled with her, but was left by the teacher to clean the whole playground. When Cyrus found me, my legs were so sore that I could hardly stand. Seeing Cyrus frown, I subconsciously shrank back. Then I remembered what the classmate said in the afternoon: "Luna, why don't you have a mother and father? Why are you alone?" I just finished cleaning the playground. "I'm asking, why are you the only one cleaning the playground?" Cyrus interrupted me impatiently. I shook my head, strangely not wanting to tell him about the argument in the afternoon. "Brother, could you please carry my school bag for me? My legs are so sore." I peeked at him carefully, desperately comforting myself that I wasn't a child no one wanted. I still had a brother, and he was still willing to come and pick me up and take me home. Cyrus interrupted me directly: "Get on." He turned around and crouched in front of me. I climbed onto his back in a daze and slowly. The boy's shoulders were still thin and frail, but at that moment, they were like the strongest harbor, so warm that I wanted to cry. The tears flowed uncontrollably. Cyrus paused for a moment, and his voice softened a lot. "Luna, what happened at school today?" I couldn't hold it back anymore. The grievance and sadness exploded in my heart, and I burst into tears on Cyrus's back. I still remember the sunset and the tree shadows that day, as well as the temperature on his back and his good-looking side face. At that time, I didn't think that the infatuation from that one glance would cost me my entire youth. That day, I truly fell in love with Cyrus. After that day, I used every means to pester him. Cyrus's face, which looked mature beyond his years, would always become very vivid when I annoyed him. His favorite saying was, "Luna, why are you so annoying?" But the smile in his eyes and his gentle voice were clearer to me than anyone else's. At that time, we were together all day long, as if no one could separate us. "Brother Yen, how do I do this problem?" Cyrus put down the book in his hand and started teaching me math problems for the 500th time. But I was only looking at his slender fingers, soft eyelashes, and the pitch-black eyes when he looked at me. I didn't remember anything else. "Luna, why are you so stupid?" After he said this, we were both stunned. "Brother, what did you just call me?" My eyes were shining. "Are you going to write it or not?" He changed the topic abruptly. But I caught sight of his flushed ear tips. "When I go to university, you're on your own." He shook his head in disgust. "Then you go to a university of science and technology. Teach me math all the time, for a lifetime. At that time, I thought we would be like this for a lifetime, and no one could separate us. Until I met Amira. Amira was as pure and flawless as her name, and extremely charming. Most importantly, she was gentle and generous, with excellent grades, much better than me, this little bean sprout, in every aspect. Whenever I went to find Cyrus, I always saw him talking to Amira with a smile. I had an inexplicable hostility towards Amira, and I knew she felt the same way about me. I was scared, so I could only go to find Cyrus more frequently, throwing tantrums and doing everything I could to attract his attention. Gradually, there were more and more rumors and gossips in the school. Whenever I went to find Cyrus, I always heard others jeering maliciously. That day, Amira asked him, "Cyrus, is this your sister?" Cyrus replied quickly, "Yes, she's my sister, my biological sister." His voice was so firm as if he deliberately wanted everyone to hear it. I looked at Amira's relaxed expression and was so maddened by an inexplicable anger. "I'm not his biological sister at all. We don't have any blood relationship." I deliberately emphasized the words, blood relationship. Amid the strange shouts rising and falling in the classroom, Cyrus pulled me out of the classroom with a dark face and didn't say a word on the way home. "Luna, stay away from Amira, do you hear me?" he warned me. "Amira isn't as kind and amiable as you think." His eyebrows were tightly knitted, and his tone was full of concern. Unfortunately, I was so angry at that time that I couldn't think straight. "Why did you lie to her? I'm not your biological sister at all." I was extremely angry and aggrieved, thinking that Cyrus was simply unreasonable. "So what? Besides being a sister, what else could you be?" He laughed at himself, with a struggle and pain in his eyes that I couldn't understand. But I was just heartbroken by his words. My precious girlish feelings had already been seen through by him and rejected by him long ago, and would never see the light of day again. Cyrus and I started a cold war. I no longer went to find him. He used to wait for me to go to school and pick me up to go home as usual. But I avoided him. Gradually, he also stopped talking to me. The two of us were like strangers living under the same roof. It was another stormy night. I was shivering while hugging the quilt. In the past, I always pestered my brother to let me sleep with him, but now, tears of grievance and fear fell together, and I couldn't help sobbing. A pair of gentle hands patted my back. I knew it was Cyrus, but I stubbornly refused to turn my head to look at him. I heard him sigh, brush the hair on my forehead, and heard him say, "Brother is here." I had never hated the word brother as much as I did at that moment. "I don't want you to be my brother anymore." I summoned all my courage to say that sentence. I could feel Cyrus's arms tightening around me instantly, and his trembling arms seemed to be trying hard to restrain something. "Cyrus." I looked up at him, not calling him brother, for the first time. I looked at his face and thought to myself, "Do you, perhaps, like me a little bit too?" In the end, Cyrus didn't say anything. He just held me tightly and placed a restrained kiss on my forehead. I turned my head and buried it in his arms. All the thunder was shut out, and the rainy day didn't seem so annoying anymore. I thought that I might look forward to rainy days in the future. "Wait for me a little longer, Luna, wait for me." I was in a daze and didn't hear the rest of his sentence. All I remembered was that his arms were so warm, the only refuge for my lonely soul. "Cyrus, will you come home for dinner tonight?" In the dark living room, only the faint light of the cell phone screen remained. That was the chat interface where Cyrus hadn't replied to me since this morning. I looked at the table of food that had already gone cold in front of me and remembered that I hadn't cooked for him for a long time. In the past, Cyrus's father was busy with work, and we both had lunch at school. But Cyrus had a bad stomach. I had seen him running to the toilet clutching his stomach several times after eating in the cafeteria. I started to learn how to cook by myself. I originally thought that after that rainy night, our relationship would be as good as before, but I didn't expect that Cyrus would avoid me like avoiding a fierce beast or a raging flood. How could this be? At that time, I didn't understand why. I just thought that if I treated him better, could I make him change his mind? Cyrus's father looked at my figure that was just a little taller than the stove, my fingers covered with band-aids and my sweaty forehead, and sighed almost inaudibly. I looked at Cyrus's father's solemn expression and also remembered that during this period of time, Cyrus's father always called Cyrus to the study for a long talk throughout the night. After coming out, I always saw Cyrus's red eyes. Cyrus's father, do you know about it? I stopped what I was doing, feeling a bit scared. If I were Cyrus's father, I might be very disappointed in myself too. Would he drive me out? I'm sorry, it's my fault. It's about Brother Yen. Cyrus's father shook his head and said to me earnestly, Luna, you don't need to worry about these. You can study with peace of mind. We will always be a family. How could I not understand the implication of Cyrus's father's words? But the hands stroking my head were so warm, just as warm as the day when he saved me from the abyss. At that time, I was fearless about the road ahead. I thought that as long as I waited a little longer and persisted, Cyrus's father would always agree in the end. Brother, here's today's bento. I excitedly handed the finally successfully made lunch box to Cyrus. I had just run over from home and hadn't caught my breath yet. I carefully took out the warm box from my arms. Malicious jeers rang out around us. Cyrus, you're good. You've got a virtuous Lin Dayu at home. The one who led the jeering was a famous delinquent in our school. I saw Cyrus's face visibly darken. He pulled me out of the classroom. The lunchbox fell to the ground during the tugging, and half of the steaming hot food spilled on the ground. Luna, don't come to our class to find me anymore, do you hear me? Why? I asked him with red eyes. The girl at that time still had the naivete and courage of youth. Cyrus's eyebrows were tightly knitted. He glanced into the classroom, with suppressed anger in his eyes. But when he met my red eyes, his expression softened a bit. Before he could say anything, footsteps came from behind me. Cyrus's expression froze as he looked behind me, and then it took on a mocking look. Why? Cyrus twitched the corners of his mouth as if I had asked the stupidest question in the world. It's annoying enough to see you at home. Can you stay away from me at school? When Cyrus said this, his eyes looked over the girl's thin shoulders, and his voice was loud enough as if he deliberately wanted to say it to someone. Ayan, why is your clothes dirty? Amira's voice came from behind. Only then did I see that there was also a spot on Cyrus's clothes. I saw him frowning and brushing it off as if he had touched something dirty. Nothing. Cyrus's voice softened. I had to try my best to hold back the urge to cry. Amira took 2 steps forward and walked into the classroom side by side with Cyrus. When passing by me, she seemed to look at me casually. I knew that in this silent battle, I had lost for the first time. Later, I picked up the lunchbox on the ground and walked home alone. I was crying while swallowing the leftovers, and I coughed because I choked. I still remember that it rained heavily that day. Since then, I have hated rainy days the most. The memory ended. I cleared up the untouched food on the table and dumped it all into the trash can. Click, the sound of the door lock turning. Cyrus, tall and long-legged, walked into the entrance with a chill all over him. Why are you having dinner so late? He asked me with a frown. I smiled. I don't have much of an appetite. Why didn't you reply to my messages? I still couldn't help asking Cyrus. I was in a meeting and didn't look at my phone. He paused, then after taking a file, he was about to go out again as if he had never been back, leaving me alone standing in the cold living room. I've been busy with work recently. You don't need to wait for me. Take good care of yourself at home. His steps paused for a moment, and he left a sentence without looking back and then went out. Home? Can this place really be called a home? Actually, I used to have a home with Cyrus's father and Cyrus. How on earth did Cyrus and I end up like this today? After Cyrus finished the college entrance examination, that summer which should have been full of greenery and hope was a nightmare for me. I remember that day when Cyrus's admission results came out. He could have gone to the best university, but for some reason, he filled in a local polytechnic university. Now Cyrus can tutor his sister's math well. Cyrus's father smiled kindly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Cyrus just frowning and not refuting. I bit my lower lip and couldn't help feeling secretly happy. I was happy because it meant that I could see him every weekend. Cyrus's father took us out to celebrate. When we were almost done eating, Cyrus announced at the table that he was preparing to study abroad. I was stunned by this news and subconsciously asked, how could our family have so much money? Cyrus pondered for a moment and said, I'll go with Amira. Do you really dislike seeing me that much? I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. I had studied so hard this year just to be able to get into Cyrus's school and get a little closer to him. But when I finally reached this goal, he told me that he was going to fly away and never come back. I ran out, ignoring Cyrus's father calling my name behind me. Before I knew it, I had run onto the road. The blinding headlights froze me in place. Bang! All I could see in time was Cyrus's father's anxious face and the truck that leaped past in front of me. When I finally came to my senses, all I could see was a pool of bright red on the ground, which was extremely glaring. I saw Cyrus running towards here. I saw Cyrus's father's pale lips. I staggered forward a few steps and touched those warm hands that had already lost their warmth. For those few hours, I sat outside the operating room, having no idea how the time passed. If I could, how I wished the person lying inside was me. That was the first time I saw Cyrus cry. The look of pain and restraint was more shocking than ever before. The doctor came out, and I saw him shake his head and say that Cyrus's father wanted the two of us to go in. I leaned over his bedside, not daring to look into Cyrus's father's eyes at all. I could feel that those once strong hands, the hands that had led me home, were losing their vitality bit by bit. I saw Cyrus's father motion for Cyrus to come closer and say something with all his strength in his ear. Cyrus suddenly raised his head, and that look pinned me to the spot as if blood had been splattered right there. Actually, I could guess what Cyrus's father had said. It was probably something like taking good care of me. This was undoubtedly a shackle for Cyrus. After all, he was such a person who took his promises seriously. I had killed Cyrus's father, the nicest person to me in the world, the father of the person I liked. I had hurt the last person I wanted to hurt in the world. And now, he still had to keep that promise, endure hatred and pain to take care of me. Luna, you're really a jinx. After the funeral, I waited in silence for his verdict. Cyrus, I know you don't want to see me now. But I don't have the ability to support myself yet. When I go to university, take it. I won't go abroad and won't be back in a short time. You, just study here with peace of mind. Cyrus's eyes were full of tired bloodshot. He handed me a card. It seemed that through that thin card, I could see the future where Cyrus and I would be completely separated. A future with no turning back. During those 3 years, apart from attending classes, I spent all my time working part-time. I had done everything from tutoring, handing out flyers to working as a waitress. Occasionally, I also took orders to draw pictures. Gradually, I saved up some money. Although it wasn't much, it could support myself. I didn't touch a single cent of the money in that card. Over the years, I often heard news about Cyrus. He started a business with Amira. He was born to be a businessman. His studio grew bigger and bigger. Everyone said he was young and promising, and that he and she were a perfect match. Cyrus would come back occasionally, to fulfill that promise. I just felt that my whole stomach was churning with a stabbing pain. I forced myself to put on clothes and wanted to go to the hospital, but the pain was so severe that I could hardly walk. It was the only thing Cyrus had given me in 3 years. I buried it along with all my carefree youthful days and girlish feelings here. After the college entrance examination, I applied to an art school abroad, in London, England. It was a completely new environment. I told myself that it was time to move on from the past. Cyrus, my flight is at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. I'm going to study in England. After hesitating for several days, I still sent a text message to Cyrus. This was the only time I took the initiative to contact him. I waited at the airport until the staff urged me several times, but Cyrus didn't show up. In a daze, it seemed that I had gone back to 7 or 8 years ago, when I was sitting at the school gate waiting for my elder brother to pick me up after school. I took out my phone. The text message was like a stone dropped into the sea, with no reply. Let's go. I turned around and smiled apologetically at the airport staff. Finally, I left here without looking back. I left this homeland that had given me both love and hatred. The days when I started studying abroad were very pure. I got a new phone and was determined to start anew. Every day, apart from attending classes, I soaked myself in the art studio. I became much more cheerful than before, and my classmates seemed to like me very much. During holidays, I would chat and drink with friends. Only when I got drunk to the point of oblivion could I forget something. Those bloody nightmares would only stay away on drunken nights. At first, Cyrus would call me occasionally. I didn't know how he found my phone number, but I was already tired of this meaningless and empty small talk. Are you okay? His voice was tired and hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Yes. I replied softly. When are you coming back to the country? He asked again. I laughed self-deprecatingly, wondering why he would ask such a question. Cyrus, when we were young, you always taught me to look forward. Now I've figured it out. I don't want to wallow in pain anymore. Please don't call me anymore. I'll let you go, and you let me go too. Dead silence. Finally, he just said, okay. I hung up the phone and blocked his number while I was at it. After that day, he kept his word and never called me again. But I broke my word. I said I didn't want to wallow in pain, but the nightmares haunted me even more fiercely. I became more and more silent and liked being alone more and more. The art studio became my favorite place. I often stayed there for a whole day, even forgetting the alternation of day and night, reversing day and night. Several times, I didn't go home until early morning. Walking unsteadily into the neighborhood, I bumped into someone I never expected to meet in my life downstairs. Why are you coming back so late? Cyrus had lost a lot of weight. Looking at those still beautiful eyes, I was speechless for a moment. Speak, Luna. His cold voice pulled me back to reality. None of your business. I walked past him and entered the corridor without looking back. That night, I drank bottle after bottle, but couldn't fall asleep. Whether my eyes were open or closed, all I could see was Cyrus. I opened the curtain and found that he was still standing by the car. I laughed freely. I even raised the bottle in my hand towards him and made a cheers gesture. Cyrus's expression was ugly, but I laughed until I cried. Cyrus, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you torturing yourself and me? I fell asleep heavily, leaning over the bedside, allowing the nightmares to drag me into the abyss. My extremely bad daily routine made my health deteriorate day by day. I couldn't even complete my studies. The remarks and looks from professors and classmates made me even more silent. Sun, has anyone ever told you that you're not very likable? The man who spoke to me was a handsome man who sat in front of me in class every day. I laughed when I heard this. It was the first time I had laughed since coming to England. What familiar words. Hearing them in a foreign land actually made me feel a bit nostalgic. The man also laughed. I remembered his name. He was Isaias. He was as warm and lively as his name suggested. Isaias had deep eyebrow bones and looked a bit like Cyrus, especially his eyes. They looked extremely good when he smiled. I couldn't help imagining if Cyrus would look like this when he smiled at me. I naturally became familiar with Isaias. He was as warm as a little sun. He told me that he was a doctor. With his baby face, I could hardly tell that he had already started working. I would consult him about my illness. I still remember when I first sat in the consulting room and confessed my condition to him. Isaias was silent for a full 10 minutes. He told me that the psychological factor accounted for a large proportion of this illness. If the patient always had a knot in their heart that they couldn't get out of, the condition would eventually get worse. I joked with a smile, aren't you here? Dr. Isaias, how long I can live depends on you now. Isaias rarely put on a serious face. He was silent for a while, then took my hand and solemnly promised me, Luna, I'll cure you. I'll lead you out of the past. Isaias's eyes, which were 7/10 similar to Cyrus's, were red as if they were about to drip blood. There was nothing else in them except me. I admit, I was deeply touched. Cyrus would call me occasionally. I didn't know how he found my phone number. More than half a year had passed. I thought about Cyrus and those nightmares less and less. It seemed that everything was developing in a good direction. I really thought at that time that Isaias was the one who would save me. Luna, are you free tonight? I'll be waiting for you in the Western restaurant. Looking at Isaias's message, I had a faint premonition of something. I sat in my room all afternoon, but still picked up my coat and left without looking back. Isaias was clearly dressed up carefully. He was a straightforward and handsome young man, constrained in a proper suit, looking as if he was almost blushing from being choked by the tie. After a few rounds of drinks, he buried his face in my neck. Luna, has anyone ever told you that you're beautiful? I felt a bit itchy from his rubbing and couldn't help but shake my head with a smile. The alcohol made my vision blurry. I watched Isaias's face getting closer and closer and didn't move away. Luna. Suddenly, I was yanked up by a pair of arms, and the palm on my waist was burning hot. I heard Cyrus reply to him in fluent English, "I'm Luna's brother." I laughed in his arms and cursed, "Nonsense." Cyrus's face darkened even more. He stuffed me into the car without saying a word. This was the first time I had seen him again since the day he came to see me off when I went abroad. The house I rented was small and messy, with painting tools and wine bottles scattered everywhere. Every corner was telling Cyrus how miserable Luna's life was. He grabbed my arm without saying a word and pressed on my wound. I cried out in pain. Cyrus realized something and lifted my sleeve with a terrifying look on his face. There were dense scratches, old and new overlapping, making my snow-white forearm look so hideous. Cyrus's silence was deafening, which suddenly gave me a strange sense of relief. After a long silence, his voice was low and hoarse. Luna, come back to our country with me. Didn't you tell me to focus on my studies? Ayen? I raised the end of my tone, calling him with a bit of playfulness. I had never called him like this before. This affectionate nickname, I had only heard Amira say it. Thanks to the alcohol, let me also call you Ayen. But Cyrus's face suddenly turned very ugly. Why are you still coming to bother me? Cyrus, what on earth are you thinking? I got closer and closer to him until our breaths were almost intertwined. Finally, the tears fell uncontrollably. Cyrus stood silently, his bangs covering his eyes so that I couldn't see his expression. I won't go back. I no longer have a home. At this point, you're not going to tell me that I still have you, are you? Why not? What? Still want to be my brother? Cyrus, you clearly know that I like you. Can you please not be so cruel to me? There was complete silence in the room. Cyrus finally said, I can marry you. It's not that I want to marry you, nor that I'm willing to marry you, but that I can marry you. I buried my head in my arms and laughed until my shoulders were shaking. Laughing and laughing, tears streamed down my face. In the small rented house, the girl was crying and laughing like crazy. Cyrus was standing right in front of me, within reach, but I felt that he was so far away from me. Okay, then I'll go back to our country with you. I stopped crying. I thought Cyrus was crazy, but it didn't matter. Anyway, I was crazy too. I didn't tell Isaias that I was leaving. He was so bright like the sun and shouldn't be polluted by a worm like me in the gutter. On the day we got our marriage certificate, I was sitting on the stool until the staff called me 3 times before I snapped out of it. I saw her complex expression and the words she hesitated to say. Miss Luna, are you really doing this voluntarily? Do you two need to think it over again? I shook my head with a smile and said, I was just distracted. When I glanced at Cyrus's cold-side face, the smile on my lips disappeared. I went back to Cyrus's house. It was all cold black, white, and gray. The housekeeping aunt said that he didn't come back for days and a month. It's good. It suits me well. After all, Luna, was born to be alone. Of course, he didn't come back on our wedding night, but Amira did. She was as beautiful as I remembered, so beautiful that I felt ashamed of myself. Luna, long time no see. She was holding a bunch of flowers, as if she really came to bless a long unseen friend. What are you doing here? Cyrus said he left a file here and asked me to come and get it. I just dropped by to see you. Her voice was soft, but it sounded extremely harsh to me. She put the flowers down on her own and looked around, as if she was quite satisfied to confirm my situation with her own eyes. Cyrus is still waiting for me at the company. We're a bit busy these days. I'll leave first. Amira's tone was light. What an intimate word. You don't have to do this, Amira. I smiled at her, and her face turned pale. No matter how much you struggle, it's still me that Cyrus married. Slap, 5 clear fingerprints were left on my side face, and I felt a burning pain. Do you think Cyrus really loves you? Luna, how could you be so shameless? You killed his father and still had the nerve to force him to marry you with yourself? How could you be so cruel? Why do you have to come and bother me? If Cyrus really loves you, why would he be forced by me? I smiled at Amira and only then realized that she was also a pitiful person trapped in love. She thought that this battle that started in our school days was won by me through improper means. She was wrong. I had never expected Cyrus's love. I just wanted to ask for a bit of warmth and pity in my last days. Just wait, Luna. People like you who will stop at nothing will never have a good end. Amira's eyes were red. I waved my hand to let her leave quickly, thinking that she was quite right. I really didn't have a good end. Luna, have you really left? Our treatment course has just begun. You promised me that you would get proper treatment, didn't you? It was a message from Isaias. I could almost imagine how the gentle Isaias, dressed in a doctor's gown, was earnestly admonishing me. Sorry, I'm going to break my promise. I slumped down on the ground, leaning against the wall, feeling dizzy spells. He was right. Psychological problems will eventually manifest in the body. It's been 5 years, and I've never walked out of that nightmare. I clutched my lower abdomen, feeling as if all my internal organs were in a tangled mess. Those cold, blood-stained nights eventually swallowed me up without sparing me. I staggered into the bathroom and couldn't help retching loudly. The liquid in the sink was glaringly red. I remembered him telling me that if I delayed any longer, there would be less than half a year left. At that time, I thought half a year was long enough. Now, having returned to Cyrus's side, I'm longing for more time. People are always so greedy. It doesn't matter even if fate has never shown mercy to me. At least, let me be selfish for once and deceive myself. I closed my eyes and felt so cold. On the wedding day, I got up especially early. The makeup artist was a friend of mine from when I was studying abroad. As soon as she came in, she exclaimed about how bad my complexion was. I had to make up an excuse casually to get by. I didn't invite many guests. I don't have many friends. Luna, you've lost so much weight. The wedding dress is almost not fitting you anymore. A few friends gathered around me, helping me with my dress, their eyes full of concern. Where's the groom? On such a big day, why are you here alone? Has he gone to the toilet? A friend couldn't help asking. He's busy with work and will be here later. Are you kidding? The blame in my friend's eyes was almost palpable, but I couldn't say anything to refute. After all, it was all my choice. Surprisingly, Isaias also rushed back. I looked at his haggard face but couldn't utter a single word. Luna, you look beautiful today. His voice was a bit shaky, and I could only pretend not to notice. Thank you. What else could I say at this point? Before walking down the red carpet, Isaias volunteered for me to hold his arm. He said he would personally hand me over to Cyrus. I couldn't say no to him, so I agreed. I was wearing the white veil that symbolized happiness, nervously straightening my hair. The MC rushed towards me in a panic, telling me that Cyrus hadn't arrived yet. I took a deep breath and had to call Cyrus in full view of everyone. Why haven't you arrived yet? There was a long silence on the other end before he answered slowly. I have something going on. I might have to postpone. What on earth is it? Cyrus, you were the one who wanted to hold this wedding. You were the one who asked me to come back to the country with you. Are you going to break your promise now? I spoke quickly, feeling a tightness in my chest and almost out of breath. Amira had an accident. I'm at the hospital now. He explained impatiently. I stood there, stunned, and my mind went blank for a moment. Luna, you are really sick, and seriously ill at that. That's why you keep pinning your hopes on Cyrus again and again. Amira was right. Someone as ungrateful as me will get what's coming to them sooner or later. Today is my comeuppance. Among all the guests, in the wedding hall decorated with colorful balloons and bubbles, Cyrus has once again declared to the whole world that I, Luna, am a joke. I hung up the phone, and my shoulders couldn't help trembling. I started laughing louder and more wildly, but tears streamed down my face. Looking at the expressions of the guests in the audience, some sympathetic and some disdainful, I felt extremely desolate. Luna, what was the point of your persistence over the past decade or so? I heard Isaias calling my name in panic and saw him rushing towards me. I covered my mouth and crouched down. Bloody flowers seemed to burst from my throat, and I couldn't help retching a few times. The originally pure white veil was stained red. What a pity, such a beautiful wedding dress. This was the last thought on my mind before I closed my eyes. I woke up in a hospital ward filled with the smell of disinfectant. Luna, are you okay? Is there anywhere that still hurts? I opened my eyes and fell into Isaias's worried eyes. Here was someone who was so full of me in his heart and eyes, but I couldn't reciprocate his feelings. Luna, you are really ungrateful. I'm fine. Thank you. And, sorry for making you come all this way for nothing. I forced a smile. Isaias shook his head vigorously. Don't say that. Don't worry. I've transferred to work in this hospital. I can be with you every day from now on. He took my hand and shook it carefully. A warm current flowed through my heart, and my nose couldn't help feeling a bit sour. Suddenly, the door opened. It was Cyrus, followed by Amira. Luna, I heard you fainted. Are you okay? Amira frowned, as if she was really worried about me. Only I could see the smugness in those seemingly innocent eyes. She was telling me that she had won. Cyrus stared at me with a frown, as if judging whether I was faking it. After all, the last time I was in the hospital, the compensation he gave me was a wedding. So this time, what would I ask him for? What did the doctor say? The doctor hopes that you will leave the ward immediately. The patient needs to rest. Before I could answer, Isaias stood in front of me, and his clenched fists showed his anger. Are you Luna's attending physician? Isaias nodded. Then you're not anymore from now on. Why do you think you can do that? Isaias's veins on his temple bulged, looking extremely angry. Because I'm Luna's husband. With that, Cyrus walked quickly towards me, intending to pick me up horizontally. Let's go. My feeble struggle was no match for him. I squeezed out a word from between my teeth with all my strength, get out. Isaias was quick-eyed and blocked him, standing in front of me. There seemed to be sparks flying between the two men as they stared at each other. Cyrus stared at me stubbornly, as if waiting for me to announce the winner of this confrontation. I smiled and caught a glimpse of Amira's pale face, thinking he was extremely childish. What's the point of fighting over these things now? Isaias, I'm sleepy. Please see them out for me. Since that day, Cyrus had been frequently coming in and out of my ward. He didn't know about my illness. I begged Isaias to keep it from him. I didn't want to see any of those compensatory acts out of guilt at all. I turned a blind eye to his greetings, but he seemed to have become a different person, trying his best to make me get better and cheer up quickly. But we couldn't go back. Neither of us could go back. I had already made up my mind to give you back your freedom, Cyrus. It was another silent morning. Cyrus and I sat by the bedside, facing each other in silence. I reached out and, for the first time ever, gently stroked the dark circles under his eyes. Brother Yen, I'd like a mung bean ice cream. Cyrus stared at me, his eyes full of disbelief. It had been a very long time since I had called him that. It seemed that I hadn't called him brother since Cyrus's father passed away. Okay. I'll go buy it for you. Wait for me here. Cyrus stood up in what could be described as panic. He looked back several times in just a few short steps, as if I would disappear. I smiled and waved at him, just like the girl who had waited for her brother to buy mung bean ice cream decades ago. Cyrus, I'm no longer the little girl who would wait for you in the same place, and you're no longer the cold-faced but warm-hearted teenager. We can't go back. Before Isaias took me away, I took one last look around this ward. Although I had only been here for 2 months, there were flowers, fruit baskets, and various daily necessities that Cyrus had sent. In these 2 months here, he had been gentler than in the past dozen years. That gentleness had once been something I had longed for but could never have. But now, I hoped that I would no longer be attached to it. Yesterday afternoon, before arranging everything, I kept stroking the wedding ring on my ring finger. It was a simple style, given to me by Cyrus on the day we got the marriage certificate. It was the only gift he had given me in over a dozen years. I rubbed the ring, and finally took it off, putting it together with the divorce agreement into a file bag. Cyrus, I'll let you go, and I'll let myself go too. Isaias took me to a small town by the sea. He said the climate here was very suitable for patients to live in. He took me to live in a house with a large garden. He said that if I liked, we could plant the roses I liked all over the garden. I smiled and agreed. But how many days did I, a patient, have left to live? Looking at Isaias busy preparing for our new life, how could I bear to refuse? He often cried secretly behind my back. Such a tall man, over 1.8 meters, with red eyes, looked like the rabbit I had raised when I was a child. After taking the medicine, I was often drowsy and liked to curl up in the hanging chair in the garden. But Isaias was always afraid that I would fall asleep and never wake up, so he pestered me to talk more with him. But I really didn't have much to talk about. I told him my own story. It was a very cliched, ordinary, and painful story of Luna's over 20 years. I rambled on, saying whatever came to my mind. I said that I really liked Cyrus a lot during my girlhood. I said that he was very good-looking and many girls chased after him. I said that I had once loved him with all my might in my life and then tried with all my might to forget him. I said that he had been very nice to me before. He had given me a home. He had treated me like a sister, but I didn't want to treat him like a brother. I had originally thought that he liked me a little too, but it turned out that it was just my own wishful thinking. I said that I was sorry to him, sorry to Cyrus's father. I said that he shouldn't have brought me back to the country. I struggled to lift my hand to wipe away the tears on his face, but no matter how hard I wiped, they just wouldn't stop. They were all locked in the drawer. I said that I had never regretted in my life, but if I could do it again, I would never fall in love with him again. I also said many sorries to Isaias. How could such a sunny, cheerful, warm, and gentle boy have met me? Luna, they were all right. You are the lone star of Heavenly Curse, a real jinx. Isaias shook his head while crying, his eyes and nose all red, and his hair got all messy as he rubbed it against my arms. I struggled to lift my hand to wipe away the tears on his face, but no matter how hard I wiped, they just wouldn't stop. They were almost soaking my clothes. I'll wait for you at the Niha Bridge. Don't come so soon. Wait for me to work hard for Lord Yen down there, earn money to buy a big house, and then you come, okay? You stay here, live a good life, go to the places I haven't been to, and forget me. Stop talking. He interrupted me in a fierce tone. Don't cry. I'll wait for you in the next life, okay? You must come to find me. Okay, you just wait for me there. I'll run to you. He managed to dry his tears, calmed his breathing, and took out a gift box from his pocket. I opened it, and inside was a white veil, even more beautiful than the one I wore on my wedding day. I took it out and handed it to Isaias, asking him to put it on for me. He smiled and pinned the white scarf to my hair, complimenting me on being beautiful. I wanted to take it off, but he wouldn't let me. We were playing and laughing, as if we had gone back to our teens. Suddenly, while laughing, I started coughing violently. Blood clots were stuck in my throat. I was so uncomfortable that tears streamed down my face, and I couldn't say another word. Isaias held me tightly, as if I would disappear if he let go. Will you take my ashes back for me? I pleaded with Isaias. I'm homesick. Finally, I broke down in tears in his arms. Sorry, sorry. I could only stroke the head in my arms and repeat these 3 words over and over again. Please don't say sorry anymore, okay? Luna, you're being too cruel to me. The last bit of tenderness the world showed me was letting me close my eyes in his arms. In the next life, I want to be a free wind. Never staying or worrying about anyone. Book a plane ticket for me for tomorrow. Cyrus loosened his tie and rubbed his temples. Is it still arriving in London at 8 o'clock in the evening, President Cyrus? The assistant knew his itinerary like the back of his hand. The man in front of him, who had no other form of entertainment except work, would rush to London every Saturday afternoon, rain or shine. Maybe President Cyrus had a secret lover in London. How could such a handsome and wealthy man not have a partner? But President Cyrus wasn't even moved by a beauty like Miss Amira. What kind of girl was the one in London? The assistant wondered. Cyrus drove to a certain apartment building. It was an old neighborhood, and most of the tenants were poor college students. Cyrus frowned. He knew that Luna had always been strong-willed, but he didn't expect that she really hadn't touched a single cent of that card. He often saw Luna carrying huge painting tools in and out, as if the weight was going to crush her thin body. When did the girl who used to ask him to carry her school bag after school grow up so much? Cyrus would come here every week. He would just stand far away downstairs from her. When he saw the lights go out, he would leave. Never absent, never close. He couldn't explain what kind of feelings he had for her. He didn't want to think deeply about it either. Or rather, he didn't want to admit it. He had spent countless midnight hours tracing the girl's profile by the moonlight until his father caught him. Cyrus had never done anything out of line. Whether it was his father's instructions or Amira's warnings, they had all stopped him from taking certain steps. The first time he saw Amira, his sharp intuition told him that this girl was dangerous. Amira was never a soft little white flower. She would do whatever it took to get what she wanted. That day in the classroom, Amira deliberately provoked Luna, and the rumors in the class became more and more unpleasant. Cyrus even got into a fight with the hooligans in the class because of this. That was the first time Cyrus had fought. His father just sighed about this. He told Cyrus, "Amira is a nice girl. I've thought about it. Get ready. After the college entrance examination, you'll go abroad to study." But Cyrus remembered Luna's sparkling eyes when she said that she wanted her brother to teach her math for a lifetime. Cyrus couldn't deceive his own heart in the end. Even though he knew that the schedule for studying abroad had been set, he still futilely wrote down the Provincial Polytechnic University on the college entrance examination application form. That day in the restaurant, he told Luna that he would go abroad to study. He didn't even dare to look into Luna's eyes. And then, there was the unexpected accident. In that cold ward, the promise his father wrote in blood on his palm made him unable to take another step forward. He wanted Cyrus to take good care of Luna, treat her like a real sister, always like a real sister. He did blame her. How could he not blame her? He blamed her for barging into his gray world without a word of warning, bringing the only splash of color to it, and among that, the color of blood had become the most glaring part. Love once begins, it grows deeper and deeper without knowing why. He couldn't deceive himself. All he could do was to keep himself away from Luna, further and further. But in the end, he still couldn't hold back. He couldn't resist coming to see her again and again, as if just seeing her still staying safely in a corner of the world would allow him to carry on with a glimmer of hope. She was his only haven. When he saw Luna smiling and leaning on another man's shoulder, a certain thought was raging in Cyrus's mind. He felt angry. He wasn't seeing that boy for the first time. He knew his name was Isaias. He was more honest than Cyrus, younger than Cyrus. He would smile at Luna and openly say, "I love you." He was much better than Cyrus. But before Cyrus could even react, he had already walked up to Luna and pulled her into his arms. It was the first time he had ever felt the sting of jealousy. He forcefully dragged Luna into the car. Luna obediently stayed in his arms, like a lifeless puppet doll. When he entered Luna's room, it was the first time he had such a direct understanding of how miserable her life was. The crisscrossing scars on her fair forearm were all shouting at Cyrus, "You can't even protect the one you love the most. Without a word of explanation, Cyrus brought Luna back, with the condition of a marriage certificate. Cyrus himself didn't even know who the beneficiary of this condition really was. He tied Luna to his side. He could only get entangled with her under the influence of alcohol, yet he hurt the last person he wanted to hurt. He said he would give her a wedding, and Luna said yes with a smile. Cyrus hadn't seen her smile for a long time. That day, he went out early and took care of everything, but was tied up by Amira's phone call. Amira threatened him with her life, and Cyrus had no choice but to grit his teeth and turn around to go to the hospital. This was the most regretful thing Cyrus had ever done in his life. Cyrus would always remember that day. The morning of that day was unusually peaceful. Luna actually called him brother. He couldn't even remember how long it had been since Luna last called him brother. His mind, which hadn't had a rest for a long time, mistook it for a sign of reconciliation. Cyrus hated himself for being so arrogant, thinking that everything would develop in a good direction. He didn't notice Luna's increasingly gaunt face, didn't notice her increasingly long periods of lethargy, and didn't send anyone to inquire about Luna's 5 years in London. He thought that the best thing he could do was to leave her alone, but that was just an excuse Cyrus made for himself. He could finally admit that he had been making mistakes and missing opportunities throughout his life. He was clutching the divorce agreement, almost like a madman, yet there was nothing he could do. A pitiful person who didn't dare to face his own heart would eventually be tortured by the raging fire. He was living like a walking corpse until a call from another place. The person on the other end of the phone said that he was Isaias and had something to give to Cyrus. Cyrus rushed to the appointed place like a madman, but never expected that the other person would give him a box. A beautiful, wooden, square box, with a small photo at the opening, on which Luna's smiling face was printed. Isaias asked Cyrus where Luna's home was. She said she wanted to go home. Looking at the almost broken man in front of him, Isaias couldn't hold back and told him the cruel truth. Isaias said that Luna had hidden hundreds of letters in her room. During the thousands of days and nights after he left, she had buried all her girlish feelings in that place. He watched coldly as Cyrus searched from morning till night, his hair in disarray and his clothes torn. Finally, Cyrus pried open a locked drawer with his hands, which were already bloody. But inside, there was only a handful of ashes. Luna had told Isaias that she had burned all those letters. She didn't want to wallow in the past anymore. It was all too late. Those feelings that he had never seen or responded to had already been eroded by time, leaving not a single trace. Looking at Cyrus, whose shoulders were shaking in the cold wind and whose face was covered with tears that wouldn't stop, he felt a complex bitterness. The latecomer would spend the rest of his life atoning for his sins. Isaias closed his eyes. He knew full well that they would all be trapped here, trapped under this roof, forever burying a part of themselves. This was the price of love,